Hey Merfolk fans, Joe here. Thanks for joining me today. I am here with a replay of a match I played against Mono Blue Tron earlier today. Looking at the opening hands, I have two Mutavaults for my lands, no blue sources, but I do have an AEther Vial, and then four creatures, Cursecatcher, Silvergill, Master of the Pearl Trident, and Harbinger of the Tides, providing some interaction against creature decks, if that's what I'm going to be going up against. I'm on the play. I rolled 17, the opponent rolled 9. If I don't draw into a blue source, I can just start attacking with Mutavault on the second turn. So I'm going to be able to resolve AEther Vial being on the play. I think this is a solid keep. On the opponent's side of things, we see an island and one Tron piece in the tower. We have a Remand, it's a counter spell, Expedition Map to help dig for subsequent Tron pieces. Sundering Titan. You don't see this guy around too much, but it's a pretty powerful card. For 8 mana, you get a Golem, artifact creature, and when he enters the battlefield, his controller chooses a land of each basic land type and destroys those lands. It's important to note here, it doesn't even target, so it's really hard to avoid this effect. So for example, if I have an island in play and the opponent has an island in play, he gets to choose my island. Basically, he has to choose one of each type. If I had a mountain, a forest, a plains, and a swamp, and he had an island, he would have to destroy his island, and then I would have to destroy all of my basic lands, because he gets to pick one of each type. And he does that not only when he enters the battlefield, but when he leaves the battlefield as well. So it can be a real blowout in certain matchups. It's not such a big deal against our deck, because we only play islands, so at most we're going to lose one island when he comes in and one island when he leaves. As you can see, I don't have any islands, so I don't really have to worry about that guy's effect. Looking at the rest of the opponent's hand, he has a Fabricate, which is not played in all of the Mono Blue Tron variations, but it's a strong card. For 1 blue and 2, you can play this sorcery to search your library for any artifact, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So it's a very flexible tutor for Mono Blue Tron, because sometimes what they need is a land to complete Tron, so they can search up an Expedition Map. Sometimes they can blow up the opponent's lands and really set them back, so they want a Sundering Titan. If they need to sort of establish control of the board against an aggressive deck, they can get a Wormcoil Engine. If they need to just wipe the board, they can get an Oblivion Stone. So Fabricate, pretty strong. And Epiphany at the Drownyard, a new card from Shadows over Innistrad that costs blue and X and can be cast at instant speed. You reveal the top X plus 1 card, so if you pay 5 for X, you get to reveal the top 6 cards of your library, and you separate them into 2 piles. And then the opponent gets to choose one of those piles, and that pile goes into your hand. So if you do, again, X for 5 and you reveal 6, you separate it into 2 piles of 3. It doesn't have to be even, but normally you're going to want to make it as hard for your opponent to choose as possible. You're going to get those 3 cards. So a powerful card draw spell at instant speed. So with 2 lands, an Expedition Map, a win condition, card draw, counter magic, and a tutor spell, I have to imagine this is a keep for the Tron opponent. So I think 2 keeps here. Let's see how it went. Yep, we both kept. I'm going to open with Mutavault into AEther Vial. The opponent draws into Minamo, School at Water's Edge, plays Urza's Tower, and casts Expedition Map. For my turn, I'll put AEther Vial up to 1 during my upkeep, and I draw into a second Lord of Atlantis. Now at this point, I see that I'm playing against a Tron opponent. I don't know yet if it's red-green Tron or blue Tron. I assume it's probably red-green Tron because it's such a larger percentage of the metagame. So having not drawn into a blue source, my only real choice here is to activate my first Mutavault and attack, taking the opponent down to 18. That's all I can do, so I'll pass it back. The opponent will untap, and they draw a second Tron piece, which is excellent with an Expedition Map on the table. However, having access to Remand on this turn, they're going to pass back to me with their mana untapped after playing the island. On my upkeep, I'll put the AEther Vial up to 2, and I draw Master of Waves. So for my turn, I'm going to have a choice of activating AEther Vial for Silvergill, hopefully drawing into a blue source, which will then let me play some of these blue spells. However, since I see now that I'm playing against Mono Blue Tron, and they're probably holding up mana for a counter spell here. I mean, look, I can't cast anything anyway, but the most aggressive line is probably going to be the correct one here. So I am going to use Aether Vial to bring in a Lord, activate Mutavault, and swing for as much damage as possible, which happens to be 5 this turn. So the opponent went from 18 down to 13. At the end of the turn, they're going to crack their expedition map and search up that last Tron piece. So we can see in their hand at this point, they have the mine and the power plant that they need to get their Tron mana online. However, not many great choices for them right now, since I just keep beating in with Mutavault and I have the Aether Vial. They don't have a repeal in hand, so they can't really do anything about the Aether Vial. They could cast Fabricate, but I don't know what their best target is. I guess something like an Oblivion Stone might be pretty good. Next turn, if they have Tron online with an extra island, they could cast and activate an Oblivion Stone. So that might be a decent option. See which way the opponent chose to go. Well, Fabricate is a sorcery, so they pass their opportunity to do that. They're going to go to my turn with Remand up. I guess potentially Epiphany at the Drownyard is also an instant. I drew into a Cavern of Souls, which gives me some interesting choices. Well, I guess a couple interesting choices here, because I can now cast the Silvergill even through any counter magic, but then I can't attack with Mutavault for the turn. I can still Vial in a Lord and swing for 3 and 3 for a total of 6 this turn, bringing the opponent down to 7. If I chose to bring in the Lord and activate Mutavault, it would be attacking for 3, 3, and 4 for 10, bringing the opponent down to 3, which is very appealing, but at the same time, many mono blue Tron lists run spells that interact with individual cards or 2 cards. Something like one of my friends who plays mono blue Tron plays Frost Breath that taps down 2 creatures and they don't untap during my next untap step, so it can really slow down our attacks. Against cards like that, I'm going to want to get more creatures onto the battlefield. So if I attack for 6 this turn, taking the opponent down to 7, as long as he doesn't wipe my board next turn, I'm going to still be able to swing for lethal if I play out the Silvergill now and opt not to get in with the Mutavault. So I believe that's the line that I took here. And play out the Cavern of Souls. Get in with the Master and the Cursecatcher. See if the opponent wants to bring in a Snapcaster or something like that. So having announced no blocks, I'm going to activate Aether Vial, bring in my second Island Walk Lord, and the opponent will take 6, going from 13 down to 7. On my second main phase, I will put the Silvergill Adept into play, revealing Master of Waves, and drawing into another Silvergill Adept. Pretty decent card. In the event that the opponent does wipe my board next turn, I can play Silvergill again, draw cards, and start redeveloping my board pretty quickly. At my end step, the opponent plays Epiphany at the Drownyard for X equals 2, so he's going to reveal the top 3 cards of his library, sort them into 2 piles, and I'll get to pick one that he gets to keep. That's probably not going to be very powerful, but I feel like it's a bit of a desperation move by the opponent, and given my sort of overkill lethal on board, I'm going to sacrifice the Cursecatcher to counter the spell here. Passing back to the opponent, they do draw a repeal. It's going to give him some interesting options. I don't know, with 2 Island Walk Lords on the table at this point, though, that repeal is going to be able to slow me down sufficiently. Let's think about it for a moment. If he repeals one of my Lords, next turn I'm still going to be able to activate Mutavault as a 3-3, and Silvergill as a 3-2. We'll be able to attack with Island Walk, so that's 6, bringing the opponent down to 1. If he doesn't have any blockers available, then I'm going to be able to swing for an additional 2 with the Lord of Atlantis, which will be lethal. So repeal alone on a Lord is not going to get him there. Remand is pretty pointless at this stage. Fabricate for 3 mana is only going to leave him with 5 mana, so I don't know what he could cast. He could cast an Oblivion Stone, but then not be able to activate it. Let's see what the opponent chooses to do. Definitely thinks about it for a little while. It's a pretty tricky spot. She's going to tap the power plant and an island for 2 colorless and 1 blue. And he's going to repeal the Aether Vial. It doesn't seem like a very efficient use of his mana right here. He might have just given up at this point. Actually, I guess the idea was repeal the Aether Vial, leaves 1 colorless floating, and with 5 additional mana, he could have drawn into something like a Wormcoil Engine, but with double Island Walk Lords, that wouldn't have done anything anyway. So I don't know what he was trying to hit there. However, I don't think he hit it, and he chose to scoop at that point. So a pretty aggressive game from the Merfolk side of things. Let's see how the second game went. Looking at the opening hands. On my side, I again have a sort of strange opening hand land situation with a single land, but it's Wanderwine Hub this time, so it's a blue source. I have an Aether Vial, then a Silvergill, and then Lord of Atlantis and Kira as creatures, and then some nice spells in Hurkyl's Recall and Negate. Now in this match, I was trying a new sideboarding strategy against Mono Blue Tron. Typically, I'll keep all Spreading Seas in the deck to keep the opponent off of their Tron mana. However, they enjoy having islands as well to cast all of their Condescends and Remands and Repeals. And since I have Island Walk most of the time anyway, because they play islands, Spreading Seas is not doing as much work as it has the potential to against a deck like Jund, where no matter which land we play it on, it's going to take them off of their colors and provide access to Island Walk. I took out all 4 Spreading Seas this time, and then took out the spells that interact with their creatures, both Dismembers and my Singleton Echoing Truth. And then I took out 2 Cursecatchers, since they don't interact very well with decks that have access to tons of mana. And I took out a single Harbinger of the Tides, since they don't have a lot of creatures that I need to bounce. So that was 10 cards out, and then I brought in 4 Hurkyl's Recalls, because most of the payoff cards that Tron plays are artifacts. It plays Wormcoil Engines, it plays Platinum Angel, it plays Sundering Titan, it plays Mindslaver, it plays, what else? Silent Arbiter, plays a lot of artifacts. So Hurkyl's Recall can be a real beating, being sort of a 2-for-1 in a lot of situations. And also, just getting a Platinum Angel off the table for a turn is a really important thing to have the ability to do when playing against Mono Blue Tron. So this opening hand looks really solid to me. All it really requires is another land or 2. It has a Negate to stop something like an Ugin Spirit Dragon. On the opponent's side of things, he has 1 colorless land, and it's not a Tron piece. It doesn't matter what else he has in his hand, he's not going to be able to keep that. So he goes down to 6, and amazingly hits the natural turn 3 Tron with an additional Expedition Map just to get some blue mana if he wants it. A Repeal to slow me down a little bit, and a Condescend as well. So that's a decent keep, I think. Doesn't have any payoff cards yet, but they have enough in the deck that I think it's a good keep. So they scryed and put a Treasure Mage on the bottom of the library without access to blue mana. I guess they felt that Treasure Mage was too slow. I mean, they're going to be able to get blue mana with Expedition Map, in which case Treasure Mage is actually pretty good because it gets that win condition that they're lacking right now in their hand. But they chose to put it on the bottom of the library. He's going to open with Urza's Tower into an Expedition Map. Great Tron opening. For my turn, I draw a Dispel, which is going to be useful with my single blue source. I'll play the Wanderwine Hub, revealing Silvergill Adept, bringing in the land untapped to play my Aether Vial. The opponent draws into an Epiphany at the Drown Yard, which once they hit a blue land and get Tron online, could potentially be a really powerful card draw spell. So on my second draw step, I hit a blue source. Quite lucky, I have to say. And with the opponent having no access to blue mana at this point, I could have chosen to play out a spell, but they could easily crack their Expedition Map and get the 3rd Tron piece. I have no idea he has it in his hand already. Getting Tron online next turn and inevitably playing into something like a Wormcoil Engine. So I passed, leaving mana up for Dispel and Negate. Having access to Aether Vial, I can sit back behind these counterspells a little bit. Opponent cracks the Expedition Map and strangely gets Oboro, Palace in the Clouds. That's a bit of a tip-off that the opponent already has that 3rd piece in his hand. Otherwise, they're 100% of the time going to get that 3rd piece. So opponent plays out their blue source. They chose to go with a non-island blue source wisely so that they don't turn my Island Walk on. And we see that they drew into Chalice of the Void. It can be good against Merfolk, but it can also be terrible because in my deck specifically I play 3 Cavern of Souls and can pretty easily play around Chalice of the Void. So let's see what the opponent chooses to do with that card. For now, they're just passing the turn, sitting back on Condescend and Repeal. I don't hit a third land, and the opponent, having gotten that Oboro, again, I have to assume that they have that third piece in their hand. I'm going to activate Aether Vial here and bring in the Silvergill, hoping to hit that third land. Instead, I draw into a Merrow Reejerey. Any land would have been great there because it would have allowed me to have access to Dispel and Negate, having these two blue sources. However, I didn't hit any land at all. It's pretty stinky. And at my end step, the opponent is going to try to repeal the Aether Vial. Now, this put me in a really tough spot because I could have chosen to Dispel it, but then if the opponent follows up with the third Tron piece, which again, I feel pretty strongly they have in their hand, having not fetched it with the Expedition map, they can have access to 8 mana next turn and play out Ugin the Spirit Dragon, in which case my game is just totally shut down. I can't bounce Ugin with Hurkyl's Recall. So if I Dispel the Repeal now, I won't have access to 2 mana for Negate next turn, and that's something I really want to have access to next turn. So I actually thought about all of this pretty quickly. I didn't want to tip off to the opponent that I had the Negate in hand, so I just sort of quickly agreed that this was reasonable. Off of the Repeal, the opponent hit a Thirst for Knowledge. It's going to let them dig deeper into their deck. And they drew another Tron piece, so they're going to have access to a lot of mana. They'll start off with Urza's Power Plant, but I was actually telling the opponent before he played that I was thinking about my discard. Having not countered that Repeal, I went up to 8 cards and I'm going to have to discard something. A little bit awkward. I probably would have gotten rid of the Dispel anyway, but having seen that the opponent is going to play Chalice on 2, I'm just going to pitch the Dispel here. This is getting a little bit awkward. So the opponent plays the Chalice of the Void. I throw away Dispel. I really don't care about Chalice of the Void on 1. It kind of stinks that I can't play out my Aether Vial again. This game is kind of going a little bit sideways here. But he plays Chalice of the Void with 1 counter. It's going to resolve. And they're just passing the turn back to me. I do draw a land, and it's a good one in Cavern of Souls. But with Chalice of the Void on 1, I'm not going to be able to play out my Aether Vial. So my choice here is between playing out a Reejerey, which will give me access to actually putting some creatures on the table, and then his tap ability will be able to untap a land and let me leave up Negate mana. I can do that, or I can just play the Cavern of Souls and pass, leaving up Negate. I feel like if the opponent had the Ugin in that spot, they would have just run it out. No, middling little stuff like Chalice of the Void. So I think, I'm playing an aggressive deck. I have to sort of push the issue a little bit. So I decide in the end that it's time to play Reejerey and start getting some creatures onto the board. Unfortunately, it puts the shields down if the opponent has some crazy non-creature spell to cast. I get in for 3 with Silvergill, and the opponent at his end step is going to cast that Thirst for Knowledge. And we can see that it was a pretty wildly powerful Thirst for Knowledge. He hit a removal spell with Spatial Contortion. Silent Arbiter will only allow me to attack with 1 creature at a time into a 1/5. It's pretty rough. Silent Arbiter, though, I could deal with. I do have a Hurkyl's Recall. But we see, unfortunately, they hit the Spirit Dragon. So I think this might be lights out for me at this point. Opponent thinks about it a little bit, but is going to want to keep as many of these cards in his hand as possible. Thirst for Knowledge says you have to discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact. So he went ahead and pitched the Silent Arbiter. Let me pause for a second. Silent Arbiter was a card I had never heard of until I played against it in my friend's Mono Blue Tron deck. It's a 4-drop artifact creature. 1 power, 5 toughness. So it's got a really big butt and can block for days. And it says, no more than 1 creature can attack each combat. No more than 1 creature can block each combat. So even if I have a board with like 1,000 power on it, only one of my creatures is going to be able to attack each turn. So it really, really slows things down. It can be a really good piece of sideboard tech for Mono Blue Tron. But he's going to choose to discard it in order to keep his powerful cards in hand. So on the opponent's turn, it looks like he drew an island. He played out his 2nd Tron piece, taps 3 of them for 7 mana, Oboro for the 8th. And with that Spatial Contortion, he doesn't even have to minus the Ugin. He can plus him, putting him up to 9, getting dangerously close to his ultimate, and then follows up, tapping his last Tron piece for 2 colorless for Spatial Contortion, giving my Silvergill Adept -3. So for my turn, I draw an Aether Vial, which is impossible to cast anyway because of Chalice of the Void. I spend a couple of minutes thinking about whether Kira can do anything, but then Ugin would just -3 and still be sitting at 6 loyalty. He can just pretty much do that for the rest of the game. My window to cast Negate has passed. The opponent hitting Ugin off of that Thirst for Knowledge was perfectly timed. He hit the natural Tron on his mulligan to 6. So unfortunately, I think that I had to just scoop this one up at this point. Not much I can do. So we'll go ahead to game 3. I'll be on the play again, and hopefully we'll get off to a nice aggressive start. Let's look at the opening hands. Okay, so a little bit different here. Instead of 1 land or 2 Mutavaults or something awkward like that, now I have 4 or 5 lands, which is a little bit awkward, but important to note that 2 of them are exceptional in this particular matchup. Mutavault avoids all sorcery speed removal, including all of Ugin's effects, and Cavern of Souls gets around counter spells. So this is going to be a keep for me because these cards are so good in this matchup. It would be great if one of these other lands or 2 of these other lands were other spells, but I'm going to have time to draw into other spells. Let's look at what the opponent is working with over here. Only 1 Tron piece and no tutors, no expedition maps, so they might be a little bit slow getting Tron online. 2 islands, so I'll have access to Island Walk. Oblivion Stone, if he can get the mana to activate, can wipe my board, though I'll still have access to Mutavault. Oblivion Stone, important to note, only destroys non-land permanents. Otherwise, it would be kind of insane. It would destroy everybody's lands. Wormcoil Engine, not that effective if I have Island Walk online. Spatial Contortion, great removal for Mono Blue Tron, and a Negate, which I have to imagine they only have in at this point in Game 3 because he saw... actually, did he? Yeah, he saw a Dispel in Game 2. Actually, it was just I didn't cast it, I just discarded it. But presumably leaving this in to counter my counter spells. I don't have many other non-creature spells that he should be worrying about. Alright, so this is a keep for me, and I have to assume it's a keep for the opponent, and it is. So... let's see. Just hang on a second, guys. So I'm going to open with the Wanderwine Hub, and not much else I can do here, so I am going to reveal the Silvergill Adept to represent that I have something on turn 1. The opponent drew into a Repeal, which is a nice card to have early in the game, but it's much better if I play a turn 1 Aether Vial because they can slow me down a lot by bouncing that Aether Vial. Sadly, I drew into a 6th land, but I am going to play Silvergill Adept. The opponent has no counter magic online yet, revealing Master and drawing into a 2nd Silvergill Adept. Very nice draw there. For his part, the opponent draws into a Solemn Simulacrum, which is a little bit awkward as a 4-drop, since the opponent so far only has a total of 3 mana on the battlefield and in his hand. Draw into a Master of Waves, which is a great payoff card. So at this point, with blue and colorless up, I'm assuming that the opponent has access to some kind of counter magic, whether it be Repeal or Condescend. So I'm going to play out the Cavern of Souls here and have to make a decision between playing out the 2nd Silvergill Adept or playing out a Lord here. Now, just as in Game 1, the plan in general is to push as much damage as quickly as possible before the opponent can establish sort of an overwhelming amount of mana. So based on that strategy, and given that I'm going to follow up turn 4 with a Master of Waves, I'd like to establish more devotion. So I'm going to play the Cavern and then play Master of the Pearl Trident this turn. I gave it a decent amount of thought, but in the end did go ahead and play the Lord. Tried to attack with Silvergill for 3, but the opponent's Spatial Contortion is going to take care of the Master of the Pearl Trident, and Silvergill will only take the opponent down to 18. The opponent wants to hit land here, and he does. A nice one in a 2nd Tron piece. Still without any kind of tutor to find that extra land. So let's see, what does the opponent have access to here? He can repeal my creature if he wants to, and that might just be about it. Otherwise, he can pass with Negate up. Or he can cast the Oblivion Stone right now. It is only 3 to cast, 4 to put fate counters on something, and 5 to actually blow everything up. Opponent chooses just to pass. So for my turn, I drew into another Island Walk Lord, which is great because the opponent has an island. And I have some thinking to do. Having played their 2nd Tron piece, of course I am always looking out for the possibility of an Ugin the Spirit Dragon, because that card can blow us out like few other cards. So thinking if the opponent has the potential to play that next turn, I have to think about my sequencing very carefully here. If I play a Mutavault and then cast Silvergill Adept and Lord of Atlantis, I would have 3 2-drops on the table. Ugin the Spirit Dragon can go from 7 loyalty, his initial loyalty amount, just -2 going down to 5, and totally wipe my board, leaving me with nothing but a Mutavault. If I tap 4 mana on the subsequent turn to cast Master of Waves, I'm not even going to have enough mana to attack with Mutavault, and Mutavault wouldn't even take care of Ugin the Spirit Dragon at that point anyway, since he would be sitting at 5 loyalty. If instead I play the Mutavault and then cast Master of Waves as a 4-drop, if the opponent plays Ugin and chooses to minus him, I don't know if it would be the correct play or not. Probably not, but if he minuses to get to wipe my board, including my 4-drop and all his tokens and my 2-drop, then he would go from 7 down to 3 loyalty. In which case, I can follow up the subsequent turn with an Island Walk Lord and attack with Mutavault for 3 damage, taking care of the Ugin. So in the end, I decide that's the way to go. So I'm going to play the Mutavault eventually and cast Master of Waves for 2 elemental tokens. Now with Cavern of Souls, the opponent, even if he had something like Remand, is not going to be able to stop this guy. So he lets it resolve. He chooses not to repeal my Silvergill Adept in response, which would have allowed me only to make 1 elemental, and draws into a Thirst for Knowledge. A decent card, but he would much rather have hit that last Tron piece there. He's going to tap 3 mana for the Oblivion Stone at this point. Sort of on a wing and a prayer here, because he's going to need at least a 5th land next turn to even use the Oblivion Stone. So having not played his 3rd Tron piece and having not played at all this entire game any expedition maps, you can see that the opponent is on the back foot, and I'm going to look to close it out as quickly as possible. The second Island Walk Lord here might help me do that, but probably what's going to happen this turn is I'll just cast one of them, activate Mutavault, and get in for a lot of damage. Now Mutavault with Master of Waves and Lord of Atlantis will be a 4/4. These guys will be 3 power, these will be 2. There's 4 plus 6 plus 4. It's going to be 14 this turn. The opponent's quick with the math and goes straight down to 2. Now I can just lean on the opponent with Mutavault next turn, and the Oblivion Stone can never touch Mutavault, so I feel pretty good at this point. The opponent does hit his 5th land, but it doesn't look like they have any strong plays here. Negate's obviously dead. Repeal could repeal the Master of Waves, but that would tap him out, and I have enough creatures, obviously, to seal the deal after that. So the opponent scooped, and yeah, so that was the match against Mono Blue Tron. We see he has some powerful cards in hand between the Wormcoil Engine and the Solemn Simulacrum, ramping him and drawing cards. But if Tron doesn't hit its appropriate lands and doesn't have access to Expedition Map to make sure that that happens, they can really falter. One of the reasons I really love playing a deck more like Merfolk is that it's really, really consistent in the sense that it doesn't really matter which creatures we draw. Most of them are around the same casting cost, and with AEther Vial giving us extra ways to put things out onto the battlefield, our typical game pretty much looks the same from one match to the next as far as getting things onto the battlefield is concerned. Of course, there's some variation as far as what kind of creature removal we draw and exactly which creatures we draw. Obviously, Master of Waves is going to be a little bit more difficult to get onto the battlefield than Silvergill Adept. But in general, I think it's fair to say that Merfolk is a far lower variance deck than Mono Blue Tron. So that's it. If you guys have any comments, please share them. Let me know what you think about my plays, my opponent's plays. If you haven't already, please subscribe, give some thumbs up, and any of those things. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.